Good morning, and welcome to our UN CSW 70 meeting on the Haiti Healing Project, Restorative Justice Strategies for Internally Displaced Haitian Women. This program is taking place at the Scandinavia House in New York on 17 March 2026. Our program focuses on women and girls internally displaced. The program draws from Grace Initiative's experience of resettlement of Haitians, especially through the Office of Refugee Resettlement Matching Grant 8-month program, which included Haitians. This was distinct from the Reception and Placement program, which was a 90-day resettlement program. Also, the Matching Grant program required obtaining economic self-sufficiency, and it did not allow for receiving state cash assistance. Through this intense program, we became aware of the capacity and resilience of Haitians given the opportunity. With the end of the various programs for entry into the U.S., our focus turned to Haiti and to assist in the stabilization and sustainability in the country. Our program today focuses particularly on restorative justice and community stabilization. Today, I would like to begin by briefly grounding our discussion in the current realities in Haiti. Just yesterday, or March 16th, William O'Neill, the UN Special Rapporteur for Haiti, shared updates following his recent mission, noting that while efforts by the gang suppression force are beginning to show some progress, the humanitarian and human rights situation remains extremely concerning. There are now approximately 1.4 million internally displaced persons, more than half of whom are women. Many have suffered gender-based violence. These figures remind us that beyond security dynamics, there is a profound human impact that requires sustained attention. It is in this context that we are holding this program today, because we seek to explore the connection between restorative justice, trauma healing, and the rebuilding of trust, recognizing that in situations of prolonged violence, these are essential components of recovery. At the same time, we see these efforts as directly linked to community stabilization. Addressing trauma, restoring relationships, and creating space for accountability are critical steps toward rebuilding social cohesion and a sense of safety. Finally, we are integrating a focus on small-scale agricultural sustainability, recognizing that long-term stabilization also depends on strengthening livelihoods, food security, and community resilience. In this way, today's discussion aims to connect immediate human needs with longer-term pathways toward healing, dignity, and sustainable community stabilization. The program today includes Dr. Gregory Sterling, the Dean of Yale Divinity School, Nicole Gosling, the Director of Violence Prevention, Protection, and Resilience at Episcopal Relief and Development, Dr. Jason Pope, the Acting Representative to the UN for the World Evangelical Association, Diego Osorio and Dr. Vivian Valencia of the Université de Quebec at Montreal will focus on sustainable small-scale agriculture in a humanitarian setting. And finally, Luis Miguel Ruiz Rios, who is a special advisor to Grace Initiative, will provide some concluding remarks. So thank you very much. This introduction is being taped separately because of some technical aspects of the introduction of the rest of our program. So thank you again. Yeah. Sorry. Oh, you know what? It's echoing. I have to put the speaker off my. Hold on.
Are you on?
Yeah.
You can turn on off your audio.
Hi, there is no sound for us online. I see someone speaking and slides are changing, but we cannot hear anything.
There's an echo.
You know, I think we need to turn the speaker off.
How about now?
There's still an echo.
Can you turn off your mic?
If I turn off my
Are
mic,
you using the
Hello, can you hear me? No, you didn't. Sorry.
We can hear you with an echo, Yvonne. There are two computers or systems in the same place, and that's why you have an echo.
No, it was the speaker system.
Okay.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, without an echo, it's good.
Okay. Well, it's a small enough room. I think my voice can carry. So not only have these women suffered gender-based violence, they've also had other sorts of trauma, whether their house was burned, someone in their family was killed, a friend was killed. They have, and just knowing of the horror that is going through Haiti or in their particular area is enough to make them to go to the IDP center. So they enter in there already with a lot of trauma. Next slide. So the goal of this project is that if Haiti is to move forward to stability and sustainability, the humanitarian response must be more than just delivering food support, food supplies, or shelter. We want to look at the kind of holistically and provide restorative justice approaches, trauma healing, and community dialogue as one part of it. Another part is helping with food security, which is developing small agriculture in the IDP center. The idea of this also is that in addition to the stabilization through the security forces that will be deployed or being deployed in Haiti, we are also looking at the next stage, which is called community stabilization. If you're going to have democratic governance or community dialogue, to prepare for that, there has to be also a sort of community trust and stabilization. And we're looking at a small project, but if this, and then to perhaps grow it, but inside the IDP center, when you leave the IDP center, you don't go from trauma and then out on the street. Then so it's usually good to prepare at the same time. I've worked on 5 peacekeeping missions, and often a problem is the next stage. After there's a cessation of violence, then people work on the community and governance. And sometimes that's where disruption occurs and you go back to violence just because people are traumatized, part of it, and also learning to trust one another. So this is the idea behind this project. And next slide. And we wanted to make, so restoring dignity, promoting trust at the community level, helping Haiti to make its next transition. Next one. So what is the distinction between restorative justice and transitional justice? You hear a lot about transitional justice. People go, oh, transitional justice. There is a big difference. Restorative justice is about personal and community healing. Restorative, it looks at holistically on how an individual or a community can prepare to be living together in a democratic society. Transitional justice is a lot what you might have heard maybe when Desmond Tutu started, or some countries, they go into, it's a more of a national level of transition. And it is also, it will have something like truth commissions, part of it is part of it, whole society transition. And you'll have maybe reparations as part of a transitional justice. Now, there are people talking about reparations for Haiti, but that is a different idea than restorative justice. One is holistic community, and one is more like the country. Now, neither of them are exact, both of them are transformative, but they're not really focusing. So much on criminal justice per se. So we have restorative justice, transitional justice, and criminal justice. But what we are considering now is just looking at the individual and the community, and that's through restorative justice. So as pointed out, this is like beyond security. The security is necessary because without the security taking place, they can never maybe leave the IDP center. So we want to help make that connection between the security taking place and people joining back into society with a sense of their own internal peacefulness. Okay, go back to that one more time. So we look at safety and protection, healing and social cohesion, and the third part, which will be dealt with through one of our presenters who's going to focus on the food security. And we're looking at women-led agriculture. As you may know, in Haiti, the entrepreneurs.
Being recorded.
Often the women are the entrepreneurs. When it comes to food produce, as you might know, the Madame Sarah. Okay, next slide, the last one. Next slide. Yeah. So this is the last slide. So this is like integrated process for long-term stability in Haiti. Are there any questions? Comments? Okay, everybody understands it, I think, of this group especially. Also, I wanted to introduce to you Ibrahim Nadai. He is managing our Zoom today.
Try. I have to give it the best. Well,
Okay, so Diego,
Yes, hello, we're here.
are you ready to do your presentation?
Yes,
Nicole,
and
Diego
we
is asked to go second, so we have to reverse the order. Then Nicole, you will go after Diego and Vivian Valencia.
yes, apologies for that. It's just that we're going bumper to bumper here. Vivian will have to be in a meeting and teaching a class, and I have another meeting as well. So very sorry for this, but we're very pleased to be here, part of this meeting. Thank you to the Grace Initiative. Thank you to Yvonne and everybody else who's present. Allow me to introduce my colleague and my wife, Dr. Vivian Valencia. She's a food expert who has been working on this field in different places. She's going to give us a little bit of a core technical element on how the food systems. And I'm someone who has been working with the UN and different places in the fragility, conflict, reconstruction space. I had the great honor of being deployed to Haiti 3 times in my life at different moments of the evolution of things. It's a country I know. You never know a country well, but you get to know what you don't know, and that's a point that takes a while. And I'm fully aware of my ignorance about the country, but I also developed quite an important attachment. And one of the things we wanted to present in this particular situation is basically the fact that in the case of Haiti, we have a situation right now, and we won't be able to go to the historical and different dimensions there, but we have right now a situation in which there's going to be an intervention, very focused on right or wrong, we leave that on the side, but it's going to be focused on the elements of security. And that has positive and negative impacts in terms of what's going to emerge later on at a different level vis-a-vis the situation in terms of social development, human dignity, and many other dimensions. So we have prepared a presentation. I will quickly go through the framework of background, and then we just give the space to Vivian to present the idea. This is an idea. This is something to instigate brainstorming, to present it and open it for discussion. And we won't be able to have the discussion today. 100% the idea is that we start with this discussion, a collective co-creation process is an idea. We hope to have your feedback on that. So if I may, can I please given the opportunity to share the PowerPoint? Yvonne, can you give me the right to share? There you go. Okay, so I have it now. So this is the presentation we have prepared. It's a presentation basically that takes us to the framework of certain elements of capacity and implementation. Allow me just to frame here the different screens. And great. So what is it that we want to put on the table and open it for discussions with all of you? Is that, yes, there's going to be something happening in Haiti, is something related to the whole framework of what the country is happening. This is the general overview of what we want to say. There's going to be a characterization. There's going to be a very robust mission, and we leave it for discussions whether it's the right mission or not. It's going to come. It's going to happen. And it's going to be security-based and will potentially suppress violence, but it won't generate nor is focused on creating the frameworks, the structures, the roots of a more sustainable system. And in the case of Haiti, seems, and apparently we're making the same mistake as we have made it in the past. Being what it is, what can we do? And so the whole idea is what in the system in Haiti at the current point in time, in the current situation, could be used, could be seized as a point of entry, as a point of inflection. And obviously, food systems is one of them. It's a basic one, it's a central one. And this is not to reinvent the wheel. Certainly, there has been many different interventions on food systems in Haiti. The little variance, the little point of innovation here is that can we perhaps accept the situation as it is, major environmental situation, problematic security situation, instability, but within that context, try to rebuild from a different dimension. Instead of what has happened in most of these missions, which is very normative, very linear, very sequenced, and very top-down, can we see something that can be done from the point of starting with the communities? So the whole idea is, this is what we have in Haiti: environmental shocks, food insecurity, economic collapse, and insecurity and displacement. We all know about this situation. We cannot solve a systemic collapse purely with the security intervention. Any sort of silo intervention is not necessarily going to yield sustainable results. You see short-term improvements that can be counted in weeks, perhaps months, but nothing that's going to stick. And that's what we have, the characterization, the idea of going with this massive mission. It will suppress violence, stop the bleeding, but at what cost? That's one thing. But then can we do something else? Can we work on regeneration? And the whole idea is that we have a sustainable recovery that will require rebuilding social systems. What, in terms of what we have at hand, can be used for this? And so we look at food systems and a part of the central social infrastructure. And then I'm getting close to what Vivian is going to talk to us about, because basically food systems is not just one element of the technical fabric of society. It's part of the social element of society. We all eat, but the system of eating, the way of producing food is an ingrained skeleton of what is the social fabric. So it's connected with economic restoration, right? We basically work in terms of the structural dependency that we have right now for Haiti. There was a certain degree of food autonomy and food security at one point that's no longer there. We can work as well as a way of engaging on the ecological stewardship, reversing the decades of soil degradation, deforestation. And we can also use this particular element as an element of social cohesion, establishing interpersonal trust and collective action. It's not to be normative. It's not to start teaching people something that they don't know. They have it. They just need the space to make it flourish again. So in fragile environments, food is not just about calories. It's the primary vehicle for social reconstruction and conflict prevention, as foul as the WFP about that. So what's the shift that we want to work here is you ask many institutions, you ask different NGOs, you ask different actors in the system. Given the immensity of the task, we have the tendency to immediately rely on a first intervention focused on humanitarian aid. And what Vivian is going to talk to us about, and I will pass it on to her soon, is we can use this context to move on from the framework of humanitarian aid to something that is more focused on building that kind of self-reliance and autonomy. So what is the difference from going in terms of external and the locus of control from external agencies and international donors to solidarity groups, to local farmers and communities, from building up on the humanitarian element that is basically focused on ensuring that people get to have the calorie intake and the rapid stabilization, move on to food sovereignty, local economic capacity. In terms of top-down delivery, that is connected to the dependency, for which we know is present in the country all throughout, move on to farmer-to-farmer exchange and autonomy. And in a systemic effect, remember, any type of security intervention will have a tangible effect in terms of absence of violence. Absence of violence is not peace. Absence of violence is not human dignity. Absence of violence is a very temporary effect that will very likely, unless we have different interventions, revert to the previous stage. And that absence of violence in the short term will come at a high price. Can we just move on to something else? Social and ecological repair, regeneration. So at this point, I just want to say, well, there has to be something done in the country. There has to be a mapping. And this is where I pass it on to Vivian. We need to understand food systems as a first. We need to understand how the framework works in Haiti. Different UN agencies, FAO, WFP, even the Inter-American Development Bank, the World Bank, I was part of the World Bank in Haiti as well. They all have developed diagnostics of what's happening in the place, elements about frameworks of food systems, but either from the logic of a pure market, the logic of efficiency, of the logic of specific targeted interventions that are related to what the donor is asking or what the different donors are putting together. We need to perhaps move the center of gravity to something else. So we need to figure out what the food systems is, how it works in the current context, how it works with the local pieces. And then from that mapping, we can also open the space for some sort of intervention. So if we are able to map formal and informal networks, understanding how food actually moves from where and to where and where the choke points are, we could design the interventions. And at this point, I will indicate the following. We have a situation in Haiti that is related to an environmental degradation of high impact. It is perhaps, for the historical social reasons, is one of the most discouraging examples of environmental degradation of the type that we're going to be meeting in the future in many other parts of the world. And so we have severely degraded soils, lack of irrigation, 92% of rain-fed agriculture, lack of institutional support, the control of the gangs is there, extreme inflation, trade policies that basically drowned a little bit of food capacity that the country had, and basically a situation in which most of the population is facing immediate food insecurity. Vivian, over to you.
Thank you, Diego. I will just make 3 brief points and then pass it on back to you so you can finish the presentation. So just as a quick way of introduction, I'm a professor at a university in Montreal in food systems. Before this, I was in the Netherlands in Wageningen, which is a huge agricultural university. And there we started a project called the Global Network of Lighthouse Farms, and this idea of lighthouses, which basically are positive deviants. So those actors that are excelling in the way they're farming, in the way they're approaching many of the challenges we find with farming and global issues and so on. So there's this idea of lighthouses, and focusing on positive deviance has taken on Also because these are real farmers who are excelling. So when it comes to sharing and spreading technical knowledge, inspiration, and so on, it's more powerful when it comes from other farmers than when it comes from technicians, outside experts, or a demonstration farm in a university or in another setting. So what we found is that when it comes to scaling and maintaining this knowledge, it works best when it's farmer to farmer. So there's been a variety of networks that have been set in, as well as in Latin America, focusing on this idea of lighthouse farms and how this can be pinpointed as places for learning, for inspiring. So one of the key things as this applies to Haiti is one, first, we don't want knowledge to be lost, knowledge about seeds, knowledge about what's cultivated, how to cultivate it, because when farming is interrupted and people are not farming and passing down this knowledge, it may be lost. So it will be harder to reinstate it and do so with technicians and outside agents. So it is best if it's kept, maintain this knowledge and the seeds as well, local seeds, heirloom seeds, and that then the farmer to farmers can then pass on this knowledge. So I hear what has been said about women that are still practicing. This is very important. So the idea of lighthouses, as well as it can apply in this context, is to try to identify, as this part of this diagnosis and mapping, those farmers that are really doing very good in terms of the practices they're applying, how they're fighting soil degradation, how they're including trees and other tree and vegetative cover, how they're reversing some of the issues that we know that existed and the challenges that Haitian farming faces. So once we identify some of these outstanding outlying farmers, a network could eventually be created. So there are many examples of these networks and the role they play. And again, in this case, it would be to maintain knowledge, make sure it's not lost, make sure we're maintaining the seeds, and that these are points where we can then start scaling. So one of the key also challenges is scaling and scaling these initiatives and scaling this knowledge. So what we've also found is that once you capture these outliers and these lighthouses, as we call them, it's easier to scale from that point on. So at this stage, it would be about identifying those farmers and making sure we're still nourishing them and encouraging them to pass on that knowledge, even if it's at a smaller scale at this point due to limitations and insecurity, but so that when the right moment comes to scale, this could become a strategy to start reconstructing a farming sector that's strong and that is grounded on agroecological techniques and techniques that will do best for the environment. So I think this was most of what I wanted to say with regards to the idea of lighthouses, lighthouse network, and safeguarding knowledge. And Diego, if there's something else that I may have missed, please let me know.
Yes, one extra element is that how we can connect this initiative with what's being presented here on the PowerPoint presentation in terms of we have an idea of building up the space for the farmer, but how can we give these farmers support? And this is connected, you see the presentation, Vivian, in the model of social solidarity. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, so there's a school in Brazil that was founded by the movement of farmers without land many decades ago. And it's a school in Brazil that has focused also on their neighbors in Latin America. And it teaches, it's not necessarily an agronomic or agricultural school, it's more about the social movements and the social organization. So they've had delegations of Nicaraguan, Central America, and all sorts of people who go there and learn about how Brazilian organizations have come together and progress. Because if you know a little bit about Brazil history, you know it's very strong on its social movement, how it has mobilized and driven policy change and spread and so on. And that we know from a research perspective that that is key. That farming, when there are social movements, when there are cooperatives, when there's organization, it thrives, as opposed to farmers who are farming a little bit in isolation without knowing how to organize themselves. Because in order to commercialize your product, in order to gain some of the value from the market, you need farmers who are organized. And that we know so well from literature in Latin America. And Brazil has excelled. And in this school, as I say, they've had these delegations and they show them how it has worked in Brazil and work with them. So one idea could be to reach out and see what sort of support they can give to support the Haitian farmers to organize. So when the time is appropriate, either for some of these lighthouse farmers, Haitians that we know that they're innate leaders and people in the community that we've identified to form a delegation that could go there. And we have strong contacts that know very well the university, so this is possible. And as well as in how to organize a network that we also have a lot of experience with my colleagues in the Netherlands and the work we're doing on how we identify lighthouse farms, how we bring them together and so on. So if there's also an interest in starting something like that, there's also many resources that we already have on how this has happened elsewhere.
Yeah, so as Vivian has indicated, we do have the pieces of the puzzle, and the idea is figuring out what is the best way to sequencing them and facilitate them as an enabling activity, not as an implementation activity. And it relates to the elements, the building up the mapping, partnering with established local peasants associations, building that knowledge exchange with this agroecology training, and then see what that can lead into more of a capacity ability at the general level. It's important here to figure out the following. This cannot happen unless we do a bit of mapping. Clearly, we have to go for building the trust, the diagnosis, system dynamics, but in a way that builds up on what already exists. We have to remember, and this is one of the mistakes that's made by many agencies and many institutions, we always assume there's nothing. No, there's plenty. It's just that is under stress, is under high level of shock because of the current situation. So with a tiny bit of a targeted reaching out, these structures can reemerge. We can go on this mapping. Then we can move in terms of figuring out what are the leverage points, and we can go into this particular element because Vivian, as a food expert, she's not necessarily coming from the humanitarian perspective, but the thing is that we cannot just go at it with humanitarian tools. We need to go with something that is quickly humanitarian, but rapidly moving into the enabling capacity of transitional development and autonomy building, self-reliance. So one of the elements that is important to remember is ecological restoration should not just be within the areas of the expertise, because it's not just something that happens in terms of food systems. Ecological restoration is not just UNEP. Ecological restoration is not FAO, WFP, Food for the Children. It's an essential element of social fabric reconstruction or social enabling. So it's important to remember that this is going to be something that is connected to all these different elements. So just to recap, we see an opportunity, not necessarily in the best circumstances, not necessarily with the most ideal situation, but if that's what we got, how can we intervene? How can we facilitate a window of opportunity for Haitians? And it's through this particular process. This is the idea. This is the request. This is the asking. And from here, how can we make it into something that could be possibly implementable? There are many questions that can lead to this brainstorming. We're more than happy to carry on. I don't know for how long Vivian can stay with us, but certainly if there is no space for further discussion today, but I hope there's a tiny bit, we're more than happy to continue engaging these and make sure that it happens somehow. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. We will have at the end a conclusion. Luis Miguel is listening remotely, and we can kind of bring the subjects that we discussed and questions then, because we want to make sure everyone has a chance to give their presentation. But thank you so much. And this is another aspect of community stabilization, community transformation that we're trying to present here today. I would like to now also, we've had 2 arrivals since the meeting started. And one is the Dean of Yale Divinity School. He's sitting to my right. And I just want to say thank you so much, Dr. Gregory Sterling, for arriving.
Well, I apologize. I went to the second floor. That's where they sent me. So I was there about 8:45 and they said, oh no, come at 10. So that's why I'm late.
Oh my goodness.
So I went down the street and had a cup of coffee at Starbucks.
Sorry.
I apologize.
And Neil?
Pleasure to be you. And apologies also for being late. I didn't get coffee. I'm listening on the Deputy Permanent Observer to the UN for the International Development Organization.
Yeah, and I think maybe at the end, Sunil, we discussed very briefly the distinction, restorative justice and transitional justice. But if you want to put out one point afterwards.
I'm happy to say a few words, yeah.
Yes, thank you so much. Okay, so we're going to continue our program. Our next speaker is Nicole Gossin. She is the Director for Violence Prevention, Protection, and Resilience with Episcopal Relief and Development. Nicole?
Yes, thank you, Yvonne. Hi, everyone. Thank you. My name is Nicole Hossain. I'm the Director of Violence Prevention, Protection, and Resilience at Episcopal Relief and Development, as Yvonne said. I'm currently managing a portfolio of 17 projects that focus on violence against women and girls in Africa and Latin America. And before this role, I spent nearly 15 years with the United Nations, including UN Women, in conflict-affected settings across the Arab region, South and Southeast Asia, as well as West Africa, focusing on gender-based violence prevention, women's protection, and displacement. Yvonne asked us to speak a little bit and to share some of what we've learned at Episcopal Relief and Development and what we think might be relevant as this group considers what's needed for Haiti's displaced women and girls. So we're very happy to do that. And thank you, Yvonne, for inviting us to this conversation. So Episcopal Relief and Development works in fragile settings such as Liberia, DRC, Burundi, Kenya, South Sudan, where formal systems have broken down, where women have experienced serious harm and they face challenges to access justice systems or healthcare as a result of displacement and stigmatization. The question becomes very practical for us. What does healing actually look like here with what is available? And that's also what Diego and Vivian were also discussing in terms of food security. Our starting point is that healing from gender-based violence is not only clinical, it is relational. It happens in communities. And for many of the women that we work with, their faith community is that one structure that still functions in times of crisis, that still holds trust, that still brings people together, even when they have been displaced. We found that faith leaders are very well positioned to support women and girls wherever they are, working with communities that are inaccessible to humanitarian and justice actors alike. At Episcopal Relief and Development, we work alongside these faith leaders. We learn from them. We document what they do, how they do it, and what difference it makes, particularly in settings where formal systems fall short. We train faith leaders to create safe spaces for women, to facilitate honest conversations about violence and its roots, and to actively support survivors using a survivor-centered, trauma-informed, and do no harm approach. We also work with men and young people because changing the conditions that allow violence to persist requires engaging everyone, not only the women and girls who are harmed. And so for what we've from our work, what we found, and this connects directly to today's discussion, is that the approach that works best are restorative in nature. They're about creating the conditions for women to determine what healing looks like for them, to decide what justice means in their own lives, to be heard, to process what has happened to them, and to reconnect with their own sense of worth, agency, and dignity. In practice, that looks like a structured dialogue in small groups. Women coming together regularly with trained facilitators and to support one another. Over time, these spaces become something more than support groups. They can become communities of resilience. So the trauma healing dimension is very central to this. Women who have experienced displacement and violence are carrying enormous weight. And before they can think about participating in community life or planning for their future, they need somewhere safe to put that weight down. The restorative circle, whether it's faith-based or community-based, provides that space. But healing does not happen in a vacuum, as we know, and resilience isn't only emotional. One of the things we've learned is that economic vulnerability and violence are deeply connected. Women who have no independent income, no savings, no economic standing in their household, They are far more exposed and far less able to make choices about their own safety. And that's why we integrate economic empowerment into our programming through what we call savings with education programs. They're small self-governing groups where women save together, they access small loans, and they build financial skills. The education component is key. Alongside financial literacy, these groups create a regular, trusted space to discuss health relationships and rights. For example, in Liberia, women in these groups were able to support their families, reduce their financial dependency, and make decisions they couldn't make before. We also found that these groups can become entry points for engaging men because men join these for economic reasons, these groups for economic reasons. They end up in spaces where conversation about household relationships and shared decision making can happen naturally over time. When you bring together trauma-informed healing, community-based restorative spaces, and economic empowerment, something very interesting happens. Women who've come in as survivors start to become leaders, not because there was a formal leadership program, but because the conditions for that to happen have been created. As healing progresses and as economic empowerment and as economic agency grows, we see women stepping into new roles in their communities as at their own pace in their own way. And I want to be honest that this work is not simple and we're still learning. We have a lot to learn from the communities that we work with. Changing deeply held attitudes takes time. I've just been at a project launch for work we're doing with partners in Kenya. And I've just also, before that, met with our board to emphasize that changing deeply held attitudes take time. It is not a project cycle. It is a generation, as many of us know. Engaging men meaningfully is harder than it sounds, and what works in a relatively stable community has to be carefully adapted for a context like Haiti, where you have volatile, rapidly changing, where trust is fragile and needs are very acute. But the core principle always holds in any fragile setting. Women who are supported to heal, to connect with each other, and to build some economic ground under their feet, those women become a resource for their communities, not just as a population in need of protection. Haiti is hoping for elections, for dialogue, for a path towards sustainability. And for that path to be sustainable, the women currently in displacement need more than security. They need the space and support to heal, to rebuild, and to prepare to be part of what comes next. In closing, a Liberian faith leader named Mother Susanna, after going through our faith leader training, said it very simply. It helped me stand my ground and help my community to be free from violence towards women and girls. And that is what we're working toward. And it is what I believe this discussion is pointing toward for Haiti. Thank you very much. And thank you, Yvonne, again for inviting us to be part of this conversation.
Thank you so much. You've definitely made the transition understandable between the introduction that we did earlier with restorative justice and the agricultural empowerment part, and that connects to economic and agriculture, sort of the livelihood empowerment aspect of restorative practices. Our next speaker is Dr. Jason Pope.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Dr. Jason Pope from the World Evangelical Alliance. And Nicole, I'm very grateful for your presentation. Hopefully, I'll be building directly off of your comments, looking at healing and trauma, but also on healing in terms of the community itself and building relationships across the community. When we talk about justice in context of violence, displacement, and exploitation, it's important to recognize that survivors often experience justice very differently than policymakers or institutions imagine. Trauma shapes how people remember, how they speak, and how they trust others. Survivors may hesitate to tell their story, struggle to recall events in a linear way, or withdraw from dialogue altogether. These responses are not signs of unreliability or disengagement. They are normal human responses to overwhelming threat. Because of this, any meaningful discussion of justice must begin with an understanding of trauma and the ways it shapes the survivor's experience. In my own work addressing human trafficking and exploitation, this became very clear while working with survivors of online sexual exploitation in the Philippines. Many of the children and young people we encountered had experienced profound violations of power and control. Yet when they first entered support programs, many struggled to name what had happened to them. Some felt shame, others believed they had somehow participated in the harm done to them. Many had learned to remain silent in order to survive. One example from our work in the Philippines illustrates why trauma-informed approaches are essential to justice. Family members in low-resource communities had taken payments from individuals outside of their community and in response placed their children into live chat rooms to perform sexual acts with each other. When the police became aware of the situation, they arrested the family members, took the children into protective custody, and referred them to an aftercare partner. Court cases could take many years, if they ever happened at all. And meanwhile, the children were still separated from family and from community. Some of these cases included siblings having sex acts be forced on them together, and some included even children as young as infants. So the project I was responsible for trained social workers to utilize trauma narrative therapy to help children process what had happened to them. In some cases, social workers had to accompany the children to court as they were questioned in front of their family members. We advocated for plea deals instead of court cases and video testimony instead of in-person testimony so that the children would not have to testify directly in front of a family member. While always advocate for children to be removed from situations of abuse and placed in safe environments, safety alone does not restore what has been broken. As Martin Luther King said, true peace is not merely the absence of conflict, but the presence of justice. I think Diego may have referred to that earlier as well. During trauma narrative therapy, what we learned more about than the sexual abuse the children faced was that they missed their parents. They were afraid their parents would die in prison. They wondered whether their parents had contracted COVID. They wondered if it was really that bad since they were in an online chat room and they never physically met the person that they were doing these things for. They took all the blame on themselves and the guilt on themselves. And these are some of the ways that people respond to trauma. Yet many positive lessons were also learned there. For many survivors, the first step towards justice was not confrontation with perpetrators or participation in formal legal processes. The first step was simply being able to say, this happened to me, and to have that truth heard and acknowledged. Trauma narrative therapy is a therapeutic approach that helps survivors of trauma gradually reconstruct and tell the story of their experience in a safe and supportive environment. Rather than focusing only on symptoms, the process allows individuals to organize fragmented memories, express emotions connected to trauma, and place the event within a broader narrative. By telling and reflecting on their story, often with the guidance of a trained facilitator, survivors can regain a sense of control, reduce shame and isolation, and reconnect their identity, recounting what happened, but restoring meaning, dignity, and agency in the survivor's understanding of their own life. This insight connects directly to the broader idea of restorative justice. Traditional justice systems often focus on two central questions: what law was broken, what punishment should follow. But restorative justice asks a different set of questions. It asks who was harmed, what relationships were broken, and how those relationships can be repaired. At its heart, restorative justice recognizes that harm is not only a legal problem, harm disrupts relationships between individuals, within families, and across communities. Bryant Myers has described poverty and injustice in similar terms as a result of broken relationships. These include relationships with ourselves, with others, with institutions, and with the moral and spiritual frameworks that give meaning to life. When violence occurs, those relationships fracture. It was on this premise that I worked with the Salvation Army staff members in Haiti on a project that sought to restore community resilience and individual relationships following the 2010 earthquake. The project began with the Salvation Army churches in Haiti reaching out to people who were most unlike themselves. Participants reflected on ways they might have contributed to broken relationships within their communities. A team of 12 people from the church eventually became a team of 25 to 30 people, with sometimes more than half of them not belonging to the church. Religious leaders from other denominations, voodoo priests, And teens who had been socially isolated and spent their days drinking were approached by the church members and asked to be a part of a team that helped transform their own communities. Together, they walked through their communities, talked about what they saw, and reflected on what God might want for their future. They sought to reach what the Greeks called a kairos moment. Kairos refers to the right or decisive moment for action when circumstances align and call for a meaningful response. The teams then wrote small project proposals and pursued changes together. One community high in the mountains negotiated with landowners to build a road straight down the mountain instead of winding back and forth. This reduced the travel time by 4 hours and saved the lives of people who needed emergency services. Another community rebuilt a bridge that had been destroyed during the earthquake, and yet another started a joint micro business to provide food for poor families in their community. Certainly larger and more impressive projects have been accomplished in Haiti, and each of these projects had to be completed in less than $7,000. But if you only see the road that was built, the food on the table, or the bridge that was reconstructed, you miss the essence of restorative justice. The restoration of community itself was healing. Restorative justice seeks to address these relational fractures by restoring dignity, accountability, and community recognition of harm. The development of these types of groups are actually the purpose themselves. They continue to operate even when war or instability may fall around them. Formal justice institutions are often inaccessible or overwhelmed, leaving many survivors without meaningful avenues for accountability or protection. In these environments, community-based approaches to justice can play an important complementary role, but there's a big caveat in terms of the restoration of someone who's experienced sexual abuse. Sexual abuse is quite different than building a bridge. It's different than building a road down a mountain. Every single person has their own pathway. There is no engineering plan that can be replicated over and over again. This is why trauma-informed approaches are so essential. Trauma narrative work, survivor support groups, and community-based healing practices can help restore voice and dignity to individuals who have experienced violence and exploitation. These approaches create the conditions in which restorative justice can become meaningful rather than harmful. They allow survivors to reclaim their identity, name the harm they've experienced, and reconnect with communities that recognize their dignity. In many parts of the world, communities and faith-based organizations play an important role in this work. These institutions have long-standing relationships with the communities and can provide trusted spaces where survivors feel safe enough to begin to tell their story. They can also cultivate moral frameworks that affirm dignity of every person and encourage communities to take responsibility for protecting the vulnerable. Ultimately, restorative justice is not simply a program or a methodology, it's a vision of justice that seeks to restore what violence has broken. It seeks to restore the dignity of survivors, it seeks to restore the accountability where harm has occurred, and it seeks to restore the relationships that allow individuals and communities to flourish. If we are serious about justice for women who have experienced violence, exploitation, displacement, we must ensure that our approaches prioritize survivor safety, agency, and dignity. Justice cannot begin with systems alone. It begins when survivors are able to speak their truth, be believed, and rediscover their place within a community that recognizes their dignity and humanity. Thank you.
It's really, I mean, what you're doing, the trauma therapy, but I think for the whole group, that's really important to put front stage and center, because it does reverse things. And I don't know if restoring relationships with the perpetrator is always possible. Hopefully, I speak as a person of faith that forgiveness could be possible, even if the relationship is forever severed. But I think that's
Good point.
a real challenge.
You have a comment?
I mean, I do. I was kind of saving it to the end for when you wanted me to talk about additional justice. But I mean, I totally agree with that. We can draw a distinction between rehabilitative justice for perpetrators versus restorative or reparative justice for victims and wider society. And it's important that we understand what the needs are necessarily of victims and wider society. And what, as Nicole was saying, you know, with these processes and systems, to what extent are we responding to the needs of women and girls in Haiti? But it's understanding what those needs are and developing systems and processes that respond to those reparative needs, whether it's compensation, whether it's psychosocial support, income regeneration projects. I mean, there are a raft of different forms in which justice can take shape. But yeah, I'll leave it. But wholeheartedly agree.
Yeah, and I also would like to mention that there have been a restorative trust building between the victim and the perpetrator in some countries post-conflict. In Timor-Leste, they had reconciliation process because you don't have a justice system operating. And often in the villages, they don't want to go beyond the village and finger point. And then also in Rwanda, they had reconciliation between, which is a restorative process because the numbers were so great and the criminal justice system did not have the capacity. But it doesn't mean that people should get off free and be able to carry out crimes against somebody else. But we are, in this project, we're pretty much focusing on the victim and how they can heal and how the community can heal, and the agricultural food security element and economic empowerment. It's all part of that. Because even if they had a trauma healing, they still have the realities of survival. So I just wanted to bring that up. Our next speaker is Esther Charleston. She is a Haitian American, first generation Haitian. She is also, she's the chair of the Vermont Commission on Women, and she's also a candidate for lieutenant governor. So she has transcended the trauma of being her parents immigrating to the United States from Haiti. And Esther, are you here with us?
I am, and it's an honor to be here. Thank you so much for the invitation. As we talk about the Haitian people, I think of community. I think of l'école, l'église, la caille. So that means the church community is huge. I bring that culture. I think of sauce-pois and légumes. I think of the food, and I think of the people who are hurting as well. And so who am I? Good morning, bonjour. Nom c'est Esther Charleston. I am Esther Charleston. I am daughter to two immigrant parents who came to this country searching for a better life and created one for themselves, where they pushed all five of us in education. I am a mother and educator and also the chair of the Vermont Commission on Women. I'm also the founder of Conversation Compass. And so what is Conversation Compass? We operate with the core belief that healing, dignity, and justice requires real conditions to be heard. So creating space so people can talk about the hard issues and work through them. And honestly, systems often make decisions about people, not with them. And so the importance of bringing people along. And that is the work that I do, and the work that I do through lived experience. And so I had a personal moment. I was dean of climate and culture at a middle school, and really learned through personal experience when a system was not designed for you, and the toll that it takes, from emotional to physical toll. And as a result of the harm that I experienced, I realized that harm is not just an event, but harm is also the absence of space to process and name it. And so the way I chose to empower myself was built a company called Conversation Compass, where it's not just a service, it's a structure that needs existence, where we get to have hard conversations, and I operate as a facilitator. And so the work that we do, so I speak to the bringing the community together. We focus on the conditions for the voice, making sure people feel safe, making sure that we structure for truth, so facilitated dialogue, naming harm without escalation, holding tension and being comfortable with that, being comfortable with the silence, moving from silenced truth to shared understanding within the group. And then, of course, pathway to agency. So, making sure the folks who are a part of the circle feel empowered to what happens next, making sure that they know that they are the decision makers and they have ownership. And so when I think of the eternal displacement of Haitian women, one, I think of them as my sisters. I not only think of the loss of a home, but the loss of voice, safety, and of course, loss of decision-making power. And so, yes, we talk about the humanitarian response, which is urgent and necessary. But as also mentioned before, healing requires that relational infrastructure. And we've heard from other speakers that a lot of folks sometimes church is that. I know growing up in my household, when I said l'école, l'église, la caille, it means we were either home or at church or at school. That's it. We weren't allowed to do anything else, and how that still resonates. My mom goes to Haiti every other year. She hasn't been for a few years now, but she is invested in the community, building wells and still engaged, and she passes that down to us. And so this work is so important, is so crucial. So honored to be here to really speak to that and speaking to the importance of community and bringing people together. And so with Conversation Compass, what we do, we bring folks together. We create a space with lived realities. We focus on rebuilding trust within the communities and then come to a place of collective decision making. And so, what that looks like is sitting in circles, facilitated dialogue, stories shaping programs. What do we do next? Here in Vermont, I've been able to see that, and voices informing policy, women leading, and through rebuilding efforts. And so it is so important for us to focus, to not forget the community, which I know we have made space for. And the way I've seen it shown up here in Vermont, I've worked with school systems navigating harm and conflict and bringing people together, community systems rebuilding trust. And so not only schools, but nonprofits in towns. And then, of course, on the state level, in my work with the Commission on Women, the importance of partnership. We are not able to do this alone. It is so important that we do this together. So not only talking about communities, restorative justice, but also food, agriculture, making sure folks are able to survive, have foods so that they can feed their families, but also a way to make an income. So, but what I've learned through also trauma work that I've done is people do not move until they feel heard. And we know with trauma, sometimes you forget what happens or you block it all out. And what bringing community together, having those facilitated safe spaces, what that does is it creates conditions for the hard, the honest, healing conversations to happen. I know we talked earlier about forgiveness, but maybe we let go of the perpetrator, but creating a space where they can feel free and alive and well, and really bringing that sense of dignity back to them. And my Haitian women, we are resilient. We are a resilient people. And so I know assisting and giving folks the tools that they need to continue to live their lives and be fulfilled and happy is so important. So the work that I do does that, and the work that I hear from others do that as well. And so the importance of this project is so important, and I'm in full support in any way that I can. So I am honored that I was invited and honored as a Haitian American woman making a beautiful life here in Vermont to also support my family back home in Haiti. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Yvonne asked me if I would say a few things, so this is not directly in response to you. I would applaud what you've just said, and I congratulate you for doing what you've done. I think, and I say, why would a dean of a divinity school come to an event like this? Well, let me say that for me as an American, Haiti is very important. And just to remind all of us, it's closer from Miami to Haiti than it is from New York to Atlanta, if you want to put it in perspective. And it was largely a result of Haiti's successful break for independence that led Napoleon to give up on the idea of an American empire, which led to the sale of Louisiana. So the Louisiana Purchase. So what happened in Haiti had a huge impact on the shape of this country that we call the United States of America. So for me, Haiti's always been important, and I've been in 2 universities, and in both it's had a particular role of importance. I was at Notre Dame for 23 years, and they invested heavily, some of the faculty there, in Haiti going down. I remember one priest who told me that he was there at the earthquake in 2010, fortunately on a balcony on an upper floor, and rode the building down as that whole building collapsed. Had he been in his room, he wouldn't have been telling me that story. I go to a church who has a lay leader who's asked me, and we've agreed at the Divinity School to invite Jerry Tardieu, who was the representative from Petite Ville in the Chamber of Deputies in Haiti to come and speak to address how expats living in this part of the US, that is the larger New York area, can help their colleagues in Haiti. So I could go on about specific connections, but I'm here to say that I think what you're doing is really important. And some of you have global responsibilities. I think, Jason, you must have global responsibilities. And I think that's certainly also true for Nicole, who would have global. I would just urge you in those global responsibilities to really try to pay attention to Haiti as best you can, because they really need the help. And I say, I hope all of us will make a commitment. I'm committing to trying to help Haiti. So we're going to sponsor this event with former Representative Tordu. And I'm here, even if I got bad directions downstairs and came late, but I am here. So I want you to know I'm committed to it. And I think if all of us work collaboratively, we can help make a difference. But as has been said, it won't happen overnight. The challenges are too great. So I say thank you for all that you do and for allowing me to be with you today.
Oh, thank you so much. Let's see.